The Nile cuts in a northerly direction right through Cairo. The Marriott of Cairo is situated on an island on the west bank of the Nile in a neighborhood called Zamalek. Lighted archways passed through outdoor dining areas in the very comfortable air at night. Later that afternoon, we drove through the Islamic section of Cairo, which is overlooked by the Citadel, a walled fortress built by Saladin back in medieval times to defend against the Crusaders. It was strange for me to see that the modern city of Cairo had grown up almost to the Giza plateau where the pyramids sit. There was just a sharp demarcation between the new Cairo areas and the ancient Giza plateau. We were offered the option of going into the Great Pyramid via the ascending passageway up into the King's Chamber, so 3 of us out of the group did just that. Our group bus drove us about a quarter-mile back behind the pyramids, where camel rides were offered by many of the camel drivers waiting for all the tourists.
Don't try to pet them. No. Be kind. Okay. I'm on. Do you look cute? I do. I don't.
I think we all agreed that riding camels is a little bit strenuous and really just not as much fun as it really looks. At 240 feet long, the Sphinx is the oldest monumental Egyptian sculpture known. Afterwards was a brief lunch at a very nice high-class Egyptian restaurant.
This is our lobby. We're meeting here in our back.
The old Winter Palace Hotel is a historic British colonial-era five-star luxury hotel located on the banks of the River Nile in Luxor, Egypt. It is pretty safe to say that every person in our group was really taken back by the spaciousness of the inside of the lobby and the rest of the hotel charm and history. World-renowned British archaeologist Howard Carter announced his discovery of King Tut's tomb from the royal staircase of the Winter Palace.
One here, very, very nice for Habiba. I highly recommend
Habiba. The modern city of Luxor is built over the ancient city of Thebes, which was the city at the time these ruins were actually built. Our guide told us that every single Sphinx has a unique and individual face. Two massive seated statues of Ramses II guard the huge gateway and are flanked by four standing statues of the king. Two 80-foot obelisk once accompanied them, but today only one remains. The other stands at the Place de la Concorde in Paris. Dating back to 1392 BC, the temple was built on the east bank of the Nile River and is dedicated to the deities Mut, Khonsu, and Amun. Its construction was begun by Pharaoh Amenhotep III and was completed by Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Probably less than 50 years later, Ramses II elevated Egypt to its pinnacle of power. He put his mark on everything. He set out to show the world how powerful he was and how supreme he was by building statues to himself everywhere. He glorified himself. He built monuments to himself. He added to previous temples, making them look like as if he built them himself. He had stories of his great conquest over the Hittites at the Battle of Kadesh, inscribed in hieroglyphics all over the walls of the temples. He did not mind over-exaggerating his apparent conquest. He seemed to want to make people perceive that he was much greater than he might actually have been. Over the centuries, many of these temples were reused by the Greeks, the Romans, and even the Coptic Christians. Later that evening, our group spent dinner with an Egyptian farmer's family. The little girl they had just basically took over the show for the whole night. We enjoyed the insight that we gained by spending time with this regular Egyptian family within the space of their own home.
What about me? Yes, dear.
Little video here on a boat. I didn't know we were going to go on a boat. But we did go on a boat from the east bank over to the west bank, where the hot air balloon rides were stationed. It took about 50 vans of people over there. Because we had to get up at 4 a.m. to get on the boat and then go across to the west bank to the balloon rides, as early as that was, the visual stimulation brought about by the lighted colored balloons was quite fascinating. We finally became aloft right about sunrise, and as we hovered over the landscape, we could look down into the area to the west where the Valley of the Kings was situated, and the Valley of the Queens, as well as the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. There was such a sharp distinction between the western desert and the fertile land beside the Nile. I also thought that the pilot showed great skill in setting the balloon down into fields that were crisscrossed by high-powered lines everywhere. Finally, we got back in the vans, went back to the boat dock, crossed back over to the east side to continue with the rest of our day. The Karnak temple was built initially around 2055 BC and then added onto subsequently thereafter as a cult temple and was dedicated to the gods Amun, Mut, and Khonsu. It was also known as the most selective places by ancient Egyptians. The ram was a symbol of the god Amun, the chief deity worshipped in the great temple of Karnak. Each sphinx protects between its forelegs a standing statue of the king, originally Ramses II, circa 1279 through 1213 BC. In hundreds of places in the temple, Amun is depicted as wearing a double feathered headdress. I personally took a taxi for 50 Egyptian pounds from the Winter Palace to the Luxor Museum, which by my estimate was about 1.2 miles. Once I got there, the ticket price was about 150 Egyptian pounds, which is about $5 US. My observations of this museum compared to the Cairo Museum is that this museum was much neater, newer, and everything was basically displayed very well with the information cards beside each item, whereas the Cairo Museum had a lot of that, but it was much older and it basically was in need of fresher, better, cleaner looking displays. But it had an enormous amount of material in there, which would be a very, very big and difficult task to maintain. I tried to make the museum section of the video as short as possible, but I did not want to shortchange the viewer the different various types of artifacts left behind by the ancient Egyptians either. Once again, we were ferried by boat across to the west bank of the Nile, where the bus picked us up and took our group back into the valleys hidden among the rough terrain and hills bearing the tombs of the ancient ones, the Valley of the Kings.
Audio Jungle.
This is an unfinished room. The artist basically did the sketching or the outlines of the images, later to be come in and detailed with shading and painting. Never finished.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Directly after visiting the Valley of the Kings, our bus drove directly east through the hills a very short distance to the temple of Queen Hatshepsut. She was a female king of Egypt, or a pharaoh, who reigned in her own right from 1473 to 1458 BC. After that, we all got back on the boat and ferried back across to the east side of the Nile, back to the Winter Palace Hotel.
His vizier, years.
We said goodbye to the Winter Palace and then took a bus trip down to Esna to see a temple and to do some shopping.
Or on our yacht, very narrow, won't flash. They use toilet papers. And the Nile are higher than the waters of the Nile on your right hand side. So here they regulate the level of the water. Here can you see the men on their small boats? We call them the pirates of
This is a temple that was built 9 meters below the streets of this modern city of Esna. If the temple was down that low, what other structures are underneath the modern city of Esna? The Temple of Khnum was probably the most colorful temple for sure that we'd seen to that point. It was started back during the time of Thutmose III, but wasn't completed until the Roman era around 40 to 250 AD. Right above the temple, there was a street with lots of little vendors, shops, who were very eager to come up to you and try to sell you something very aggressively. And then there were really nicer little shops that were respectable little vendors who sold you genuine Egyptian materials. The Aton sun, our home for the next 5 nights, would take us from Esna up to Aswan. On the journey up the Nile, we would stop each night on a bank and dock. We would get out and do activities during the day. The boat accommodated all 15 in our group. It was just perfect for the size of the boat and our group. The food was outstanding. 3 meals a day, a staff of 14, 2 of them most particularly Mustafa and Wisconsin. They were great. Anything we needed, they took care of it. As we departed the port at Esna, we looked forward to some of the adventures that we would have from our cruise and also just getting some much needed rest.
God, man. Yes, Kentucky. Yeah.
It didn't take but just a very few minutes after I got on the boat that I laid on the couch and took about a 2-hour-long nap. I was in wonderment just pondering the demarcation between the desert and the fertile banks of the Nile, just how sudden the change in topography actually was. Mid-afternoon, the boat tied off at a small village called Higz. A local woman named Asma gave us a tour of her small village. We got to see a lot of the children in the village, as well as learn a little bit about the infrastructure. It was a small farming community. All the kids and children around the area seem to be very friendly and anxious to see us tourists.
In all ways, I'm going to do the highlights of the temple. This is our second in there, but the groups in their way out. So hopefully we are in good timing as well. Visit.
That evening, the crew had something planned for us after dinner on the banks. Once we arrived at the island, we were greeted by a family unit of about 10 people. Some of the facets of our village tour included observing how they bake bread in what appeared to be a clay oven, visiting the school children coming out of their school classroom, a mosque, some of the individual kids around the village on the island populated by about 300 individuals. They gave us hands-on demonstration on how to use a sickle to cut the tall grasses and canes, and also shared information on various crops they have, such as bananas, dates, and mangoes. Those two boys were swimming playfully in water that was also nearby, occupied by water buffalo, which seemed to be quite distasteful. Here we see our farmer and his wife, who hosted us for a family lunch meal. We all brought personal gifts to the family children. Mine was a fossilized megalodon tooth I had found scuba diving near Venice, Florida.
And I like here, and I wish die here. Here green and no blue.
This ancient temple is located on the quarry site that included sandstone that built almost all of Egypt's great monuments and temples, including Karnak, Luxor, and Kom Ombo, and many others. Stones quarried here would be transported down the Nile via large boats to the temple's destination sites over hundreds of miles. Despite not wanting to work on the King Tut jigsaw puzzle, I got sucked in on it and had to work on it constantly until we got it finished. Another fun detail is we had a crew member on board who did this towel art, and we were really amazed at some of the things he could create. Such an added dimension. After getting off the boat at Ferries, we took the little tut-tuts back some winding streets in the little village until we came upon an area where the basket maker was doing his craft. He passionately described the process to us before he started to give us a demonstration. He not only used his hands, but he also used both of his feet. He then recruited several of us to try to participate in his task.
Tap it in there. There you go. Force it in there. Yeah. If it don't go, get a better hammer. Bigger hammer.
And then a well-rehearsed photo op for each of us who participated, as well as gifts for some of us who happened to be so lucky. We tendered over to the Daraw City Marina where we got into covered pickup trucks which transported us over to the camel markets. Tying the camel's front leg up is a safeguard against them from running away. It appeared to me that many buyers or sellers were sitting on the sidelines while they had surrogates in their bidding to buy or sell their animals. I observed stacks of cash being passed around. As a fun exercise, our tour guide sent us out with a small amount of money that she handed us in order to haggle with the local market vendors to purchase fruits and vegetables for the boat, getting the best deals we could negotiate.
Egyptian fish.
The Nile is notoriously dirty water. We were told that the children who live there even have to take tablets to avoid infections and rashes. But of course the temptation was too great and we had to get our photo ops and our feet wet. It was here we would be disembarking our boat and preparing to take a 4-hour bus trip through the desert down to Abu Simbel, which is extremely far down in South Egypt, very near the Sudan border.
You're going right where my video's going. It's all good.
The first place we went was to the temples of Ramses II and Queen Nefertari. They were built somewhere around 1244 BC and rested on the west bank of the Nile River for nearly 3,000 years. In a remarkable feat of engineering, the temple complex was dismantled and rebuilt on a higher hill to make way for the High Aswan Dam in the 1960s. Historians believe that Ramses II built this southern border temple near the Nubian territory to intimidate and to display his awesome power that Egypt was not to be tampered with. Inside and outside you see multiple images of defeated, mostly Nubian warriors who've been bound and captured and in some cases being executed. Ramesses' #1 wife was Nefertari. He honored her enough to build her own temple. But even in her own temple, the images were very similar, depicting Egyptian gods such as Amun-Ra and the pharaoh executing or enslaving other cultures such as Nubians. The images certainly depict a very clear and distinct warning to their Nubian neighbors to the south. Every hotel that we stayed at during our trip was just really top-notch, each having their own character and unique qualities. After our time in Abu Simbel, our bus traveled back 4 hours across the desert again, back up to Aswan. The High Dam is a major infrastructure in Egypt. It is protected by the military as a high-value target, and it prevents major flooding in all of northern Egypt. It also allows the population to live year-round in those low-lying lands. Certainly no tour of Egypt would be complete without seeing the modern effects of the dam on the nation of Egypt. Our next 2 nights were to be spent in a very special place, the old Cararact Hotel, a historic place to say the least. This hotel is a historic British colonial-era 5-star luxury resort hotel located on the banks of the Nile River in Aswan, Egypt. It was built in 1899 by Thomas Cook. Its guests have included Tsar Nicholas II, Winston Churchill, Howard Carter, Margaret Thatcher, Jimmy Carter, Francois Mitterrand, Princess Diana, Queen Noir, and Agatha Christie, who set portions of her novel Death on the Nile at the hotel. Despite retaining much of its old-school charm and infrastructure, it had just the right balance of that as well as modern amenities to boot. We were able to set aside some time from our busy itinerary to be able to sit down, lay down, and relax beside their luxurious pool for an afternoon.
In the Cararact Hotel in Aswan.
Their featured restaurant was the 1902, built in 1902, and was just as glorious and decorative as the rest of the hotel. One evening, I took a hotel tour up to the 3rd floor to see the suite that Agatha Christie had used while writing Death on the Nile. It was a first-class suite and afforded a beautiful view from the 3rd floor, looking out the back towards the Nile River below.
Yeah, that's pretty
It
neat.
is for 4.
That evening, we got a chance to shop the local market before dinner at a nearby restaurant. Our hotel was built a few hundred yards downstream from the first cataract, one of 6 on the Nile. Our guide, Noah, arranged for us to take an early morning boat discovery tour around the low-lying shorelines along the Nile adjacent to our hotel to see the cataracts, the marshland, the reeds, the bulrushes, and indigenous wildlife. All in all, it was such a peaceful and relaxing way to enjoy a morning on the water. The cataracts of the Nile, as spoken of before, are basically upstream just several hundred yards from our boat tour. Not to be confused with the High Dam, built in the 60s, the old dam is a short distance downstream from it, but just above Aswan and the Cararact Hotel. On top of the old dam, a road connects west to the east side of the Nile where Aswan is located. While on the bus in Aswan, we went downtown near the waterfront, and one day we had lunch down there at a local restaurant. On the morning of our last day, we took a boat out to the temples of Philae, which was a short bus ride upstream from Aswan. Our boat passed by the restaurant on the cliff where we would have lunch right before we got to the temple of Philae, honoring Isis. As in all the temples we'd seen before, the images and the hieroglyphics on every stone facade was just overwhelming. At this point, I was beginning to feel a little bit templed out. Crosses were evident inside the temple, showing that Coptic Christian influences had been brought to bear in more recent years. As was the case down in Abu Simbel with the Temple of Ramses, this temple complex was moved in order to save it from the rising waters of Lake Nasser as well. Our final night in Aswan at the Cararact Hotel was to be our farewell dinner. Several people had bought some traditional Egyptian garments and wanted to wear it during the dinner. So everyone dressed up and then went to dinner dressed in various Egyptian attire. There were so many things on our itinerary during the trip, and we had been on the go so much that I think every one of us were looking forward to perhaps getting on back home again and resuming our normal lives. Our return to the Marriott in Cairo was more or less a pit stop in order for us to prepare for our flights the next morning. We were all basically looking forward to getting back to the United States and specifically Kentucky.